Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away into the next room. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Henry Scott Holland. Few individuals could have foreseen that a compassionate nurse, with decades of hands-on experience working closely with the dying in environments where conventional medicine could no longer offer cures, would deliver a series of assertions powerful enough to leave the world speechless. The weight of her observations was no less than groundbreaking, for they offered a glimpse beyond the physical realm and challenged commonly held beliefs. Barbara Carnes, the nurse in question, revealed profound and life-altering reflections derived from her years of comforting those in their final days. "There is a popular assumption," she once remarked, "that doctors and medical professionals, through prolonged exposure to suffering and death, often adopt a cynical or atheistic view of life and mortality." As someone who had devoted over 2 decades to accompanying the terminally ill on their final journey, she admitted, "One might expect that witnessing so much suffering and loss would make a person lose faith in any form of higher existence. But paradoxically, instead of falling into despair, I found myself believing more strongly in an afterlife." Barbara's unique perspective was forged through years of dedicated service and commitment to her patients. She did not begin her career with an expectation of uncovering any spiritual revelations. Born in 1941, Barbara enrolled in a nursing program immediately after completing high school. Her early years were spent as a full-time nurse, but as her expertise grew, she ascended to roles of greater responsibility, becoming an administrator and executive director at various hospices and home care institutions. Her professional journey would eventually span decades, shaping her as an authority on the care of terminally ill patients. Throughout her career, she was confronted with countless patients suffering from terminal diagnoses that modern medicine had deemed untreatable. These individuals were not merely statistics in a medical report. They were mothers, fathers, sisters, and friends who were courageously facing the inevitable. Observing their behavior, fears, and hopes as they approached the end of life inspired Barbara to document her findings. She compiled her observations into a comprehensive reference guide titled "Gone from My Sight: The Dying Experience," which she published in 1985. The booklet quickly gained international recognition, with translations in 12 languages and over 45 million copies in circulation. Healthcare workers, caregivers, and family members around the world have since relied on it as a guide to better understand the psychological and spiritual needs of the dying. Unlike many clinical resources, Barbara's work goes beyond the biological aspects of dying to offer an empathetic perspective on how individuals process their mortality. In her writing, Barbara delves deeply into the emotional and spiritual facets of dying. She offers insights on topics ranging from coping with a terminal diagnosis and managing physical pain to dealing with grief and the importance of self-care for caregivers. She emphasizes that death, despite its cultural associations with fear and suffering, is often a peaceful and transformative experience. In her words, "People do not understand that there is a normal and natural process of dying. It is not always painful or terrifying. My materials aim to guide and support those who are navigating this path." Since 1994, Barbara has devoted much of her life to educating the public about end-of-life care. She frequently speaks at national and regional medical conferences, nursing schools, hospitals, and hospices. Through her talks and workshops, she teaches families how to support their loved ones during the dying process and offers practical advice to medical professionals who work in hospice care. Her dedication to this mission has made her a sought-after expert in the field. For over 40 years, she has shared her knowledge and compassion with thousands of individuals, helping them find comfort and peace in the midst of loss. "I can't explain every case I've seen," Barbara confesses, "but I've witnessed so much that I can't help but believe there is more to life than what we see." Death is the great equalizer. Regardless of one's wealth or status, everyone eventually faces the unknown. Barbara recounts many stories of patients who, despite their initial fear of death, found peace and acceptance as the end approached. One particularly memorable case involved a woman with heart failure who had been haunted by the memory of her father's painful death from the same condition. She was paralyzed by fear, Barbara explains. But through gentle reassurance and honest conversations, we helped her understand that death is often a gentle process. As the body's systems begin to shut down, patients gradually drift into unconsciousness. Even when they are unable to speak, they can still hear and feel the comforting presence of their loved ones. In the final weeks of life, many of Barbara's patients reported experiencing vivid encounters with deceased relatives or friends. These visions often brought them immense comfort and signaled to the hospice staff that death was near. When patients tell me they've seen their mother, a deceased sibling, or even a beloved pet, it's as if a weight is lifted off their shoulders. They feel reassured, as though someone is waiting to guide them to the other side, Barbara shares. One poignant story involves a woman who, on her final night, opened her eyes and smiled toward a seemingly empty corner of the room. "Mom, I'm so glad to see you," she whispered before passing away peacefully. Similarly, another patient, a 52-year-old woman who had initially been terrified of death, experienced a profound transformation. In her final days, she began conversing with her deceased father, eventually telling Barbara, "It's okay. I'm not scared anymore." Researchers and scientists have long sought to explain these near-death experiences and visions. Some attribute them to biological processes, such as a lack of oxygen or the release of endorphins in the brain. Others view them as psychological coping mechanisms that help individuals come to terms with their mortality. However, a growing number of experts, including Barbara, believe that these phenomena point to something more profound, a glimpse of the soul's transition to an afterlife. In the early 20th century, Irish physicist William Barrett conducted one of the first large-scale studies on near-death visions. His research included over 35,000 documented cases from the UK, USA, and India. His findings revealed a striking pattern. Patients who reported seeing deceased loved ones tended to die more peacefully and quickly than those who did not. One case involved a young Indian man who, despite showing signs of recovery, suddenly exclaimed, "There's someone in white clothes standing here. I'm not going with you." He passed away just minutes later, leaving doctors puzzled. These experiences, Barbara explains, are not confined to any one culture, religion, or region. Near-death visions have been reported by people of different ages, genders, and backgrounds, suggesting that they are a universal phenomenon rather than a product of any specific belief system. Patients from all walks of life, whether deeply religious or not, have described similar encounters with deceased loved ones, radiant lights and peaceful landscapes, she says. It is difficult to dismiss such consistent reports as mere hallucinations or coincidences. One of the most common figures seen by the dying, according to Barbara's observations, is the mother. This is not surprising, given the profound emotional bond that many people share with their mothers. Psychologists have suggested that the mother figure represents comfort, safety, and the return to a nurturing state, which is why she frequently appears in moments of transition. Barbara recalls a patient suffering from cancer who, in the final hours of her life, smiled and said, "Mom, I'm so glad to see you." This simple yet powerful statement reflects the deep sense of reassurance that many people experience when they perceive the presence of a loved one. It's as if their mother's presence bridges the gap between life and death, making the transition less frightening, Barbara explains. In another case, a 67-year-old woman who had been bedridden for weeks suddenly became alert and began speaking to her deceased husband. "He told me he's here to guide me," she said. Shortly after, she passed away peacefully. This type of encounter is not limited to mothers or spouses. Patients have reported seeing a wide range of figures, including siblings, grandparents, children, and even pets. In addition to seeing deceased loved ones, many of Barbara's patients described visions of radiant lights, unknown beings, and places of extraordinary beauty. These descriptions are remarkably similar across different cultures and time periods, suggesting a shared human experience. One elderly woman who had been bedridden for several days suddenly sat up and asked, "Do you see those lights? They're calling me." Within minutes, she passed away. Barbara recounts another case involving a 90-year-old woman who often spoke about hearing the ethereal singing of a choir and feeling the gentle brush of angelic wings. Whenever she mentioned it, a serene smile would spread across her face, Barbara says. It was as if she had already glimpsed the peace and beauty of the next world. These experiences are not confined to the dying alone. Family members and caregivers have also reported witnessing inexplicable phenomena. In one particularly compelling case, the 5 Anderson siblings in Atlanta gathered around their mother's bedside as she neared the end. Suddenly, a bright, unearthly light filled the room. It wasn't like any light we had ever seen before, one of the daughters recalled. We all saw it, and we were momentarily paralyzed by awe and fear. Moments later, they saw their mother's spirit leave her body and ascend through a portal of light. Such shared experiences challenge the conventional explanations that attribute near-death visions to the dying brain or hallucinations. In cases where multiple witnesses report seeing the same phenomena, it becomes difficult to attribute these events solely to biological or psychological factors. As Barbara points out, when several people experience the same vision, it suggests that there's something more at play, something beyond our current scientific understanding. The scientific community remains divided on how to interpret near-death visions. The body theory attributes these experiences to physiological changes such as oxygen deprivation, the release of endorphins, and chemical imbalances in the brain. According to this theory, the brain creates comforting hallucinations to ease the fear and pain of dying. The psychological theory posits that near-death visions are a defense mechanism designed to help individuals cope with the prospect of death. In this view, the brain constructs familiar and comforting images, such as deceased loved ones or peaceful landscapes, as a way of reducing anxiety. The spiritual theory, on the other hand, suggests that these experiences are genuine glimpses of an afterlife. Proponents of this theory argue that the consistency of near-death visions across cultures, religions, and time periods indicates that they are more than mere hallucinations. Barbara aligns with this perspective, stating, "I'm not a scientist, but I've seen too many cases to dismiss them as random brain activity. I believe that there is a spiritual dimension that we tap into as we near death." While near-death visions share many common elements, the specific details of the experience often reflect the individual's cultural background and religious beliefs. For example, Christian patients may describe seeing angels or Jesus, while Hindu patients may see Hindu deities. Despite these differences, the underlying themes of peace, guidance, and reunion with loved ones remain consistent. Barbara emphasizes that these visions provide comfort regardless of the patient's belief system. Even patients who considered themselves atheists reported feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and love as they approached death, she says. It's as if, in those final moments, they are embraced by something greater than themselves. One of Barbara's key messages is that death is not something to be feared, but rather a natural part of life's journey. Her work aims to dispel the stigma and fear surrounding death by encouraging open conversations about end-of-life issues. She believes that by confronting our mortality, we can live more fully and appreciate the time we have. For caregivers and family members, understanding the dying process can help alleviate feelings of helplessness and fear. Barbara's advice is to remain present, offer comfort through touch and words, and listen without judgment. Even when a patient can no longer speak, they can still hear and feel. Holding their hand, speaking softly, and simply being there can make a world of difference, she explains. One of the most significant aspects of near-death visions, Barbara explains, is the sense of closure they provide, both for the dying and their loved ones. Many people fear dying because they feel they have unfinished business, she says. They worry about the loved ones they are leaving behind or regret missed opportunities in life. However, the appearance of deceased loved ones in near-death visions often helps resolve these feelings of guilt or fear. The dying person receives reassurance that they are not alone and that their passing will be a peaceful transition. Barbara recalls a patient named John, who had been estranged from his brother for many years due to a family dispute. In his final days, John frequently spoke of seeing his brother who had passed away years earlier. He told me that his brother had forgiven him and was waiting to welcome him to the other side, Barbara says. John's face lit up with relief, and he passed away without the burden of regret. Similarly, family members often find comfort in the knowledge that their loved ones were not alone when they passed. Barbara shares the story of a young woman whose mother had died after a long battle with cancer. She was heartbroken at first, but when she heard that her mother had seen her late father standing by her bedside, her grief was eased, Barbara explains. It helped her realize that death isn't the end, but a continuation of the journey. These experiences raise important questions about the role of forgiveness and reconciliation at the end of life. Barbara emphasizes the importance of addressing unresolved conflicts before it's too late. The dying often reflect on their relationships, and many of them express a desire to make amends, she says. It's a reminder to all of us to live with intention and mend broken connections while we can. One of Barbara's core beliefs is that as people approach death, the barrier between the physical world and the spiritual realm becomes increasingly thin. She describes this transition as a state of living in two worlds at once, where the dying are physically present but spiritually connected to something beyond. This dual existence may explain why many patients appear to converse with invisible figures or see visions of places that are invisible to those around them. It's as if their spirit begins to detach from the body and explore the next dimension, Barbara explains. They can see things that we cannot because they are straddling the boundary between life and death. Barbara shares the story of an elderly man named Edward who had been bedridden for weeks. One afternoon, he suddenly sat up and pointed toward the ceiling, saying, "They're here. They've come to take me home." His daughter, who was by his side, saw nothing but felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. Moments later, he passed away, Barbara recalls. It was as if he had been waiting for their arrival. This phenomenon is not limited to individuals who are actively dying. Barbara has encountered several cases where family members or caregivers have experienced similar visions. I've heard from countless families who described seeing lights, hearing music, or feeling an unexplained presence in the room as their loved one passed, she says. These shared experiences suggest that the transition from life to death is not an isolated event, but a collective journey. The psychological comfort of near-death visions. From a psychological perspective, near-death visions can be seen as a coping mechanism that helps the dying process their fear of the unknown. Psychologists suggest that these visions create a sense of familiarity and safety, which can alleviate anxiety and promote a peaceful passing. Barbara acknowledges the validity of this explanation, but believes that it doesn't capture the full scope of what she has witnessed. There's no denying that the mind plays a role in how we experience death, but I don't think it's the sole explanation, she says. The consistency of these visions, especially when multiple people witness them, points to something beyond the psychological realm. Research in this area has gained traction in recent years, with scientists exploring the possibility that consciousness may continue beyond physical death. Studies on near-death experiences, NDEs, have documented cases where individuals report vivid, out-of-body experiences, encounters with deceased loved ones, and a sense of merging with a higher consciousness. One well-known study conducted by Dr. Raymond Moody, author of Life After Life, found that a significant number of people who were revived after being clinically dead described similar experiences. They talked about moving through a tunnel of light, feeling a sense of unconditional love, and meeting beings who radiated warmth and acceptance, Barbara explains. These accounts align with what I've observed in my work with dying patients. Different cultures and religions offer various interpretations of what happens after death, but many share common themes of transition, reunion, and spiritual awakening. In Hinduism, for example, death is seen as a passage to another phase of existence, and the soul is believed to be reborn based on its karma. In Christianity, the afterlife is often described as a place of eternal peace and reunion with God. Barbara's patients have described visions that reflect these beliefs. but she notes that even those who did not adhere to any particular faith reported similar experiences. It's fascinating to see how universal these visions are, she says. Even people who didn't believe in an afterlife were comforted by the presence of deceased loved ones. In one case, a man who identified as an atheist described seeing a radiant figure bathed in light. He told me, "I don't know who or what it is, but I feel safe." Those were his last words before he passed, Barbara recalls. The role of hospice workers in supporting the dying. Hospice workers play a crucial role in providing emotional, physical, and spiritual support to patients and their families during the dying process. Barbara emphasizes that their presence can make a significant difference in how patients experience their final moments. We're there to ensure that they're comfortable, but more importantly, we're there to listen, she says. Sometimes, all a patient needs is someone to validate what they're experiencing. Hospice staff are trained to recognize the signs that a patient is nearing death, including changes in breathing, decreased appetite, and withdrawal from the external world. They are also taught to provide reassurance and comfort, which can help ease the transition. Barbara recalls a particularly moving experience with a young woman named Sarah, who was in the final stages of a terminal illness. She was scared and didn't want to be alone, Barbara says. I held her hand and told her it was okay to let go. She smiled and said, "I see them now. They're waiting for me." Moments later, she passed away peacefully. The science of near-death experiences, bridging faith and evidence. In recent decades, scientists and medical professionals have taken an increasing interest in near-death experiences, NDEs, and deathbed visions. Although these phenomena were once considered anecdotal, modern research has begun to explore their biological, psychological, and potentially metaphysical causes. The challenge, however, lies in bridging the gap between empirical evidence and the deeply spiritual nature of these occurrences. Dr. Sam Parnia, a prominent researcher on NDEs, conducted an extensive study through the Awareness During Resuscitation project. His team investigated hundreds of cases where patients were clinically dead and later revived. In over 40% of the cases, patients reported conscious awareness during the time they were clinically dead, despite their brains showing no detectable activity. These patients described seeing their bodies from above, hearing conversations between doctors, and feeling a sense of peace and detachment, Barbara explains. It's hard to dismiss these accounts as mere hallucinations when they recall details that they shouldn't have been able to perceive. Furthermore, brain scans of patients experiencing cardiac arrest have shown bursts of gamma waves, patterns typically associated with heightened awareness, shortly before death. Scientists speculate that this burst of activity could be the brain's attempt to preserve consciousness, but they have yet to fully understand its implications. To study the phenomenon of near-death experiences is to explore the intersection of science and spirituality, where the unknown leaves us questioning the very nature of existence. Dr. Raymond Moody. Barbara acknowledges the importance of scientific research in advancing our understanding of the dying process, but she cautions against reducing near-death visions to purely biological events. Science can explain certain aspects of what happens in the body as it shuts down, but it doesn't account for the profound sense of connection and peace that people experience, she says. There's more to the story than just neurons firing. The spiritual significance of deathbed visions. Many spiritual traditions view death as a sacred transition rather than an ending. This perspective aligns with the experiences of Barbara's patients, who often describe their final moments as a journey towards something greater. One of her patients, a man named Thomas, described seeing a bridge surrounded by light. He said he could see loved ones waiting for him on the other side, Barbara recalls. He wasn't afraid. Instead, he was excited, like someone about to reunite with old friends. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo Thodol, commonly known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes death as a passage through different states of consciousness. The text teaches that the soul encounters visions of light and deities, which reflect the individual's inner state. Those who achieve enlightenment can recognize these visions as manifestations of their own mind and attain liberation. Barbara notes that although her patients come from diverse backgrounds, many describe similar themes of light, guidance, and reunion. It's as if the soul recognizes a universal truth that transcends cultural and religious boundaries, she says. Messages from the departed, symbolism in near-death visions. A common feature of deathbed visions is the presence of symbolic messages conveyed by the deceased. Barbara explains that these messages often carry profound meaning for the dying, providing clarity or closure. One of her most memorable cases involved a woman named Margaret, who had been estranged from her daughter for many years. As Margaret lay on her deathbed, she described seeing her late mother, who urged her to forgive her daughter. She said her mother told her, "Let go of the pain. It's time to heal," Barbara recalls. Margaret asked to see her daughter, and they reconciled before she passed. This experience highlights the healing potential of near-death visions, not only for the dying, but also for the living. When the dying receive messages of forgiveness or love, it often prompts them to reach out and make amends, Barbara explains. It's a gift that can transform grief into peace. The role of light in near-death experiences. In almost every account Barbara has heard, light plays a central role. Patients describe moving toward a radiant light that fills them with warmth, love, and acceptance. This light is often perceived as a guiding force, leading them to the next phase of existence. Barbara recalls a man named Peter who had been skeptical about the afterlife. In his final moments, he described seeing a light that seemed to emanate from within him. He said, "It's not just outside of me, it's part of me," Barbara explains. He smiled and said, "I finally understand. We are the light." The concept of light as a symbol of divine presence or spiritual awakening is deeply embedded in many religious and philosophical traditions. In Christianity, light is often associated with God's presence, as seen in verses such as John 8:12. "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Similarly, in Hinduism, light represents enlightenment and the soul's journey toward liberation. The Upanishads describe the soul as a spark of the divine, destined to merge with the cosmic light. Could near-death visions be glimpses of this divine light? Barbara believes that it's possible. Whether you interpret it as a religious experience or a manifestation of the soul, there's no denying the profound impact it has on those who experience it, she says. Shared death experiences. When the living see beyond the veil. In some cases, the living also experience visions or sensations during a loved one's passing, a phenomenon known as shared death experiences, SDEs. These experiences often mirror the descriptions of NDEs, including visions of light, feelings of euphoria, and encounters with spiritual beings. Barbara recounts the story of a woman named Lisa, who was holding her mother's hand when she passed away. Lisa described seeing a golden light fill the room and hearing a voice say, "She's safe now," Barbara explains. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if she had been given a glimpse of the afterlife. These shared experiences suggest that the boundary between life and death is not as rigid as we perceive it to be. It's as if the living are momentarily invited to witness the transition, Barbara says. It challenges our understanding of consciousness and the nature of reality. A legacy of compassion and understanding. After decades of working with the dying, Barbara has made it her mission to share her knowledge and experiences with the world. Through her books, lectures, and interviews, she hopes to change the way society views death and dying. "I want people to see death as a natural part of life, not something to be feared," she says. "If we can approach it with compassion, understanding, and an open mind, we can transform the way we experience loss." Barbara believes that her work is far from over. She continues to advocate for better end-of-life care and hopes to see more research on the spiritual aspects of dying. "There's so much we don't understand, but that's what makes it fascinating," she says. The mystery of death is a reminder that life is precious and full of wonder. Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it. Haruki Murakami. As she reflects on her journey, Barbara expresses gratitude for the lessons she has learned from her patients. "They've taught me that love transcends death, that forgiveness is healing, and that hope is eternal," she says. "And for that, I am forever grateful." The healing power of deathbed reconciliation. Throughout Barbara's years working with terminal patients, she observed a recurring theme: the immense power of reconciliation. For many, the dying process brings unresolved issues to the surface, including long-standing conflicts, regrets, and emotional wounds that have remained unhealed. Barbara believes that addressing these unresolved issues can be one of the most healing aspects of the end-of-life journey. One of the most transformative experiences we can have before death is reconciliation, with others, ourselves, and life itself. This is when healing transcends the physical and touches the soul. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Barbara recalls a patient named John, a former police officer who had been estranged from his son for more than a decade due to a bitter argument. As John's condition worsened, he confided in Barbara that he regretted the estrangement but didn't know how to fix it. "I don't want to leave this world without telling him that I love him," he said, tears streaming down his face. Barbara contacted John's son, who initially resisted visiting. "He felt that too much time had passed," Barbara explains, "but I told him it's never too late to heal." After much persuasion, John's son agreed to visit. When they saw each other for the first time in years, they both broke down crying, Barbara recalls. They hugged, apologized, and talked for hours. John passed away peacefully the next day, holding his son's hand. Barbara notes that the act of forgiveness often has a profound effect on both the dying and the surviving loved ones. Reconciliation allows the dying to let go of emotional burdens, which can make their transition more peaceful. For the survivors, it provides closure and comfort, knowing they made peace before it was too late. Psychologists have long emphasized the importance of forgiveness in reducing stress, anxiety, and depression. Studies have shown that people who forgive experience lower cortisol levels and improved emotional well-being. Barbara believes this is especially true for the dying, as unresolved emotional conflicts can create inner turmoil. "It's like the soul is seeking resolution before it moves on," she explains. When we forgive, we're not just freeing the other person, we're freeing ourselves. Death is a natural part of life, and accepting its inevitability can ease fear and anxiety. Grieving is personal and non-linear, with emotions like sadness and anger coming in waves. View death as a transition, not an end, as many spiritual beliefs suggest afterlife or rebirth. Show love and presence to the dying through touch, soft words, and a calming environment. Resolve any lingering emotions by seeking forgiveness and closure when possible. Focus on comfort instead of cure by prioritizing palliative care for emotional and physical relief. Prepare spiritually or practically by arranging final wishes and finding peace with the transition. Seek support from family, friends, spiritual leaders, or grief counselors when coping. Maintain a healthy connection to lost loved ones through journals, photos, or keepsakes. Take care of yourself during grief by prioritizing sleep, nutrition, and mental well-being. Embrace the mystery of death by accepting the unknown to help reduce anxiety. Allow space for personal growth, as grief can lead to strength, reflection, and new perspectives. If you found this helpful and insightful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with others who might benefit from it. Your support helps us create more meaningful content. Thank you.